Welcome to A Woman's Heart. Today we are very blessed and honored to have with us Diane Arnold. Thanks so much for joining us today, Diane.
Thanks so much for having me with you. I'm excited.
You are welcome. I am excited to have this conversation as well. We have already had some of our own conversation beforehand, which has been delightful. And I am looking forward to diving into this book that God has placed on your heart. As you mentioned, it is so very, very timely. And God has been doing some wonderful things with this. And I can see why with you. And I showed you, I have a couple of little dog-eared notes for me to remember on this. But before we dive into that, I would love for us to get a chance to know you. And so tell us about yourself and something fun that isn't normally in your bio.
Okay. All right. So, yes, for those of you that didn't see Lisa with the book, she's like got it dog-eared. And I said when we got on, I was like, yeah, see, and I've used my own life examples in this, a lot of my own struggles. And I'm like, yes, as you can see, I am a mess, right? And I am in a place myself at my ripe old age, of getting to that place where, I'm still dealing with some of the
Mhm.
things that block, who we are and who we're called to be. But I am a licensed counselor. I live in South Carolina at this point, which if you look at the back of the book, it says I live in North Carolina. So there's something that people don't
Oh,
know. I am like, I don't know why. I think that was an error.
okay.
And actually, I think what's kind of interesting, um, other than like I said, we'll talk about some of the things that weren't all that fun in my life, but
Hmm.
um, I think it's kind of interesting that I grew up in North Dakota,
Oh,
actually
okay.
almost Canada, like we're real close to the border. So you were
Wow.
talking about the snow, and I was like, oh
Hmm.
yes, I know the snow and I know the cold.
You
I
would
know the
know the
ice.
snow and the cold being up in North Dakota, which is probably why you're in South Carolina now.
Probably no, that was husband's job, believe it or not. But I think it made me fairly resilient.
Okay.
You know, I want to say that about myself. It's like I've got so many things that aren't great. So, we'll get to some of those. But, one of the things that I think living in that climate does for you. And if you're out there and you know exactly what I'm talking about, write into Lisa, but it's like you need to be able to prepare and,
Yeah,
the weather matters,
it
to if
does.
you're going to get to work or if you're going to get your kids to school or,
Hmm.
all you get groceries for crying out loud, it matters to, how your day's going to go. And I think a lot, especially in South Carolina, I just totally take that for granted.
Yeah.
You go when you want to go. It's always
Hmm.
beautiful and you probably don't need a jacket,
Yeah,
but
probably not.
but I think up in North Dakota, people often say that we're tough people. I think we're tough people.
Hmm.
It's like, and you come back and do it next winter, it's coming.
Yes.
Yeah, it's coming. So that's
Yeah.
something I think that a lot of people don't know about me. And I spent a lot of years there. And
Okay.
yeah.
Very good. Well, we are happy to welcome you down south in the better weather. Sorry for the hurricanes.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah, you traded snowstorms for hurricanes, but there's only a short season for that. But I'd love to pick out that you mentioned that it helped make you resilient. And I think that is a big word these days and
Yes.
probably very critical. I mean, when you talk about your book, 12 Habits for a Sound Mind and Joyful Life, I would think resiliency is right on up there and plays
Yes.
into so many different factors. But you mentioned that you're a counselor. So with that and the resiliency and everything else, and God really placed this on your heart to share. How did you know that this is what God wanted you to do?
So that's a really good question. Um, I was two things were happening.
Okay.
One, I had become gone through a major betrayal, which I talk about.
Hmm.
in the
Yeah.
book, my husband, and this is 20 plus years ago, had a very public affair.
Hmm.
And, we were front page of the Wall Street Journal, public affair.
Wow.
And so, that I think I knew that, or thought I had healed from that, and didn't realize the tentacles that betrayal had. And I write
Okay.
about a lot of those in some of the habits. How do you deal, with not living in peace? How do you deal, with living in fear, rejection, shame, not wanting to trust people, not wanting to be vulnerable again? Why would you? They might hurt you. But one of the things that you just said was, yeah, I think it's the second to last chapter. I call it adversity rather than, resilience. But, how do you live in a place that may not feel like a Barbie world, where
Hmm.
it's right, it's
Yeah.
sunshine and roses all the time. And, how do you have the courage to get up tomorrow and do that again and again and again? Because sometimes that's not a habit that's
Yeah.
passed down really well. In fact, if you look at, I don't want to get in trouble over this, but Psychology Today just sent out their new magazine, and it's called The New Grown Up, and it's this grown up man sitting in his um kid's tennies in a baby stroller.
Mm.
You can get the picture, and it's like, what what's going wrong, inside of me where I don't feel strong enough, you know, that resilience that we're talking about right now. No
Yeah.
blame on parents out there, no blame on young adults out there. I think that, I'm not of that young adult age, but and I think my world was a lot easier than yours. I know it was. I'm
Hmm.
living, in a full different world where I'm not thinking schools are going to get shot up, or, you
Yeah.
know, buildings are going to get taken down, or some new COVID's going to show up. I don't, I'm sorry for that,
Hmm.
but it
Yeah.
is what this young adult, is having to face. And so, and not to mention the economic,
Yeah.
economically, they cannot afford, the
Hmm.
houses or even a house to live in. So there's a lot going on with that generation, but part of it has to do with that strength of mind of saying, I'm not going to quit,
Yeah.
you know? Wasn't that Heidi
Hmm.
Baker who says you win if you don't quit? Is that what she said?
Ah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
And
know about that. But yeah, you mentioned because I have three young adult children,
me too.
and it's a completely different world. And there's some things where for me as a parent, I don't know how to help them navigate it because those things didn't exist when I was their age. I mean, the technology is such that my mother related how quickly things changed when she looked at I went to college with a brand new electric typewriter that had an autocorrect button.
I love
And
it.
man, that was so cool. I mean, you didn't have to use whiteout. And my brother's only, and some people are going, whiteout, what's whiteout?
What's white
What
out?
is that? I mean, there's some people out there going, I don't even know what she's talking about. And I was like, and I really don't think I'm that old. But my brother, who's only 4 years behind, he had to go with a personal computer. My daughter came about when there were cell phones just coming out,
Yeah,
and you didn't have unlimited talk and texting. You had to pay for every minute, and kids were running up hundreds and hundreds of dollars of texting bills, and we're
right,
like, mm-mm, no.
right.
and that we didn't put her on our plan because, it was like you were going to buy minutes. We're not going to do this unlimited hundreds of. But by the time her brother and sister came along, only 3 and 5 years later, it was like $10 and you had unlimited texting and talking. And
Right.
it's like the technology had changed so much and it's still changing so much with the social media and the expectations. And so it's hard to help them navigate through some things that I never would have thought would have been a reality. I couldn't have even dreamed them up in my imagination with
Right.
movies that they're dealing with. And they're on then my grandparents, they went through World War II and the
Right.
atrocities they saw,
Right.
but the resilience that they had. And so it is a very, very different world. And whereas we can be physically one age, but emotionally and relationally, mentally, a completely different place.
Right. Right. And I think, your question to finish it is kind of exactly that. I'm watching myself not completely healed. I'm watching mainly, I would say young adults. I would say more than Gen X or more than Gen Z. No, I would say millennial Gen Z coming in, and because that's about 40-ish to, you know, I would 40-ish to probably about young 20s
Okay.
now,
Yeah.
coming in and um was struggling with the same things. I'm depressed, I'm anxious, and I'm like, okay, well, that's a symptom of what's going on, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I believe that God had kind of personally walked me through a lot of this. Like the betrayal, was a cause, but I was experiencing a lot of those same symptoms,
Yeah.
you know?
Hmm.
And I, I knew that I hadn't gotten to the root of what was happening. We could do all kinds of anxiety work. We could do it, and it would help. Don't misunderstand me. But I hadn't gotten to the root of you know, what these, beautiful people were so struggling with.
Yeah.
And when I was really searching the Lord one day, he said, well, they don't know who they are.
Mm. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that makes complete and total sense.
Yeah.
They don't know who they are and they don't know what they're called here to do. And it's causing them all of these problems
Yeah.
in their life.
Yeah, well, and when you say that they don't know who they are, we start getting into the identity piece. You mentioned early on in the book that, the Maslow's hierarchy of
Yeah,
needs, and that sometimes we want to jump to those higher level things of what is my purpose? Why am I here? Who am I? When we haven't fully taken care of the other basic needs of feeling loved and accepted and all of that.
right.
And that a lot of that causes some of that disparity. So I'd love for you to touch on that, but then also when you say they don't know who they are, it sounds really good. Oh, this is your identity. And then as Christians, we find our identity in Christ. But I would like you to flesh what exactly that looks like because it sounds great, but when it
Yeah.
gets down to the nitty-gritty of living it, okay, Oh, my identity is in Christ.
But
What
that
does
was the
that really mean?
and that was the problem with me. And if you're out there listening right now, it could be the problem with you is like, yes, I know that. I know that up
I
here,
know that in my head. So many things we know in our head, but
right?
it doesn't always connect to our heart and our
Right. But I
spirit.
hadn't already connected. And because I hadn't connected, I'm having all these symptoms,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Or I didn't have an understanding of what was more importantly blocking me. So when I go to who I am before I jump to Maslow, who I am, we have social media blocking us.
Hmm.
That comparison trap where, you know, God bless, I love social media, but that it's not real. We all know
Hmm.
it causes us to not feel good enough, measure up, or, feel like we can be like the Joneses or whatever it is over there. And it's sad. We know it, but we still can't put down the darn phone. We
Because
still
we're
want,
curious. We want to
we're
see what's
curious of what's
going on
happening,
and
right?
we want to see how many
But
likes or see what so and so's birthday was like.
But we need to understand, okay, that's blocking us. My value isn't based, on someone else's, filtered version of success,
Hmm.
basically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And and then we have those lies that we're believing about ourselves. The Bible talks about the renewing of our mind. We know that practically. How do we deal with that?
Yeah.
We're running around. That blocks who we are. If
Hmm.
I'm believing in my heart that I'm unworthy, that I'm never going to succeed, that I'm unlovable, then I'm going to have these symptoms. You know, I don't know if you said it or if I haven't said it yet, but over 70% of that age group is struggling with anxiety and depression. That's what we're looking at as a
Yeah.
nation. So
Hmm.
I'm looking at those symptoms, like what's blocking that. And then we started and we touched on this, um that emotional, you know,
The
almost
emotional maturity.
well, that lacking resilience, that
Yeah.
feeling overwhelmed by what's
Hmm.
going on with the world,
Yeah.
you know? And uh, that again is not the fault of that age group, but it is blocking, you know, that connection like we just talked about to
Yeah.
happen in our hearts. And so the things in the 12 habits are things that we've put in there, after we get an understanding that, that's what's going on. Then we've got these habits that can help us get to the place where we can get that uncovered for who we are. We can walk in the belief of that
Yeah.
I'm okay, you know, um, for who God created to me. And I know what my purpose is here. And I can have, one of the stories we talk about, Nehemiah's resilience. We talk about a
Hmm.
lot about personal stories, but in his resilience in there of being able to walk out against all kinds of adversity,
Yeah.
what he was supposed to do. He had, he had a big assignment, but really, when you look at it, he had a assignment. He had a
Hmm.
assignment, right? And he needed to finish his assignment. And it created that self-worth growth inside of him that he was able to do what he needed to do when he needed to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it gave him focus as well. And so it helped him to prioritize and not get so distracted because there are times I think there I read somewhere that we all have like ADD tendencies, especially if we're doing something that we don't especially want to
Well,
do.
in this generation, yes.
Yes. I mean, and even I'm like squirrel, sparkle.
Yes.
Oh, let me, I'm in the middle of something and the next thing you know, I'm like 10 steps down the road in a rabbit hole. And but when I definitely have a specific thing that I have just this is what I'm going to do today. I may get distracted for a little bit, but then I'm like, no, 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 no. This is what I want to get done today. This is my focus, my priority for the day. And having that overarching focus or purpose that we can go after, I think lends itself to even if we kind of veer off a little bit, it helps get us back in step on a path and focused so that we actually then at the end of the day, you can go, oh, okay, I was a little distracted. I didn't get everything done, but I did get this one thing done today. And there's a feeling of satisfaction and fulfillment that I did what I was supposed to do. Or on the flip side of that, I'm thinking of some
You don't.
situations where I did not expect it at all, but something came up, and I very much knew that this was not just an interruption. This was a divine appointment, and I was supposed to be there.
Right.
And absolutely, I was supposed to be there, and I had a purpose in that moment. So it can be like your overarching thing, but there can be moments in time too that things come up and oh no, 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 no. This wasn't just this a random distraction. This was a divine appointment.
And then so good. There's a beautiful example. What do you feel in your spirit when that happens?
Hmm. Oh, I knew we were supposed to be there.
There's a peace
And
and a
yeah,
joy,
there's a
right?
peace and as chaotic and as difficult as
Yeah.
the situation was, there was a peace and a strength there, and a calm of, nope, It may be kind of swirling around, it may be a little wonky, but I'm here, and there's a peace and a calm about it.
And actually, I think that's what the joy of the Lord is. It's not
Hmm.
this happy hoo-ha, not that you can't laugh, but the
Yeah.
joy is I'm walking in my true self here. This is
Hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
You know, this is so I think, back to one half of your question, is, we need to understand what's blocking us so we can know
Hmm.
what the goal is,
Yeah.
and the Maslow's was talking about purpose.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I actually used two beautiful examples. Well, first off, let's go 70 some percent of 20 to 50-year-olds say they don't know their purpose.
Wow. That's a
Right?
lot.
Well, that would make sense why they're anxious and depressed,
Yeah. Yeah, it would. That would make
right?
a lot of sense.
And
Yeah.
and I get that. I don't think I have a huge purpose, but I know that I'm called to help people get restored,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's I always get put in that slot. And it is where I feel the most accomplishment, whether I'm talking to some great big, famous person, online doing a session with them, or I'm, with my everyday people in my office. When we get to a place where they go, oh, that's
Mm.
what God wants me to do.
Yeah.
I feel like I've walked in my purpose, right? And
Hmm.
that's mine, but everyone has theirs,
Yeah.
and I think without that, you do feel totally, you know, disconnected. You feel
Yeah.
like you have this level of I'm always trying to compete with them, or I'm always trying to do, you know, their job, or
Yeah,
and
there's like a
I
wandering, lost,
yes,
discontented feel
that's
is what I'm thinking of.
and there's a lot of people doing that
Yeah.
because they're looking in that Maslow's theory at these people who have hit the top of their mountain. They've greatly succeeded. They've paid the price. You know,
Hmm.
looking at Bezos or something, look, and I'm like, they're running these, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, right? And that's what I want to be. And I don't watch what it took for them to get to there.
Yeah, we just see kind of somewhat of the finished product. We're all a work in progress until we're not here anymore. But we don't always see. We just see the success and the overnight success.
And who wouldn't
We
want
don't see
that?
the 15 years that went into that overnight success,
Or
or 20
or at a
years, or however
minimum.
many.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. We
Yeah,
we don't
so
always see that.
that's I talk about what blocks us from discovering that purpose, skipping those foundational steps,
Hmm.
you know, of
Yeah,
of of meeting our core needs, meeting our emotional stability, meeting, getting that foundation. Without that, we are going to end up in that burnout and disappointment place. It's
yeah.
just, you know,
Hmm.
um, that the social media trap of comparison that gets in the way, where people, I compare myself to someone who's greatly succeeding, out there. Or
Yeah.
my friend, we're both musicians, but I'm playing in coffee shops and he's playing,
Stadiums.
exactly, right? And it's like I'm comparing,
Yeah.
and that's going to make me feel, or that lack of training, dedication, as a therapist, we'll put people through all kinds of tests, and I put some of those in the book. You can get them where you learn, what it is I'm actually called to do. Like
Hmm.
it's horrible when I find someone who's really called to work with their hands, you know, but their whole family is in higher education. And
Yeah.
so this kid is, going to school to be a professor. And, all he wants to do is be like Jesus and build things. And I'm like, but because their family doesn't do that,
Hmm. Yeah.
they're struggling in a place. So I use that Maslow's theory to say, hey, you don't get to skip steps. If you do, this
It's
whole
going to cause
thing,
some tension.
it's going to cause some tension in your life. And
Yeah.
the one that I that I used in there is was real life one of my children, who failed and failed and failed, but he loved animals. He wanted to deal with animals.
Mm,
And um he just, I mean, talk about a bright kid,
yeah.
right? And but he just couldn't seem to get on that track of not wanting to just jump to here. So instead of risking that failure, he would just stay way below his level. You know, he would like work on a beach with the turtles or, go work in a sanctuary with the birds. And one day, after talk with him, he said, I think I'm going to go to law school. I think I'm going to be an environmental attorney. And I'm like, what a beautiful use,
Wow.
of that call on your life.
Yeah.
And now he spends, you know, his waking hours defending, animals. And I'm like,
There you go.
you know,
There you go. And
he,
I love that, you mentioned that we find our purpose. It doesn't have to be a specific thing. Like he was working on beaches and you mentioned those, and then he wants to become an environmental attorney. And you may not think like vet or attorney, they're very different things. But God uses those things that we love, and you don't always know how the pieces are going to fit. So when we're looking for our purpose, it doesn't mean that we have to be a specific thing. It just kind of has to be in that arena, and God can work with us to use those gifts and those desires and
right,
the talents and the natural bents and personalities. He can use all that in so many different ways.
right. And
And
I
so
put you through a bunch of those exercises in the book. You
yeah,
know, it's very practical. At the end of every chapter, I'm like, okay, so here's the big picture, you know,
yeah.
and
And
really,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
I like how you have those questions at the end of the chapter that really make you think and really kind of help you dive into some of those habits. Because I'd love to at least get to one. You have like the 12 different habits here, and that restore the original me, unwrap my purpose, which we've talked about, silencing the shame, let in love and acceptance, confront rejection, one of my least favorite things to do, dig new ditches and write a better story, which I saw that one and I was like, okay, what's this chapter really about? And
Did you like that one?
I did. I really liked that chapter and the neuroscience behind building new pathways in your brain because, man, I got the number of times I've heard God say, you have been around this mountain enough.
Exactly.
I will build ruts and they're not necessarily helpful or productive ones. So trying to redo some of those pathways. And then you have a lot of other really good habits in there and some good questions at the end of your book. If somebody wanted obviously you can't do them all at once, where would you, if someone maybe was drawn to a particular habit, but what's one that's really laying on your heart that you would love to share with people about one of those habits that kind of helps build on all these foundations and being of a sound mind that we've been talking about?
So, everything in me as a counselor wants to say, that these are gonna be very individual.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I had a lot of editors read this book, Um, I mean, God bless Baker Books. They just, they want to make sure it's thorough. And they would all come back and say, "Oh, I loved this chapter, or I
Hmm.
loved this chapter." And they were different, of course.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I knew as a therapist that that's what hit them. That's what they were working on. That's,
Yeah.
what made sense to it. So if you're listening out there, I mean, I just want to say, I think that you'll find that there's a habit or two that will completely make sense to you that maybe you'll want to dig more into,
Yeah.
or um that you didn't hadn't even thought about.
Yeah.
That was um I think loss is something people don't think. I wanted to call that chapter the loss of plan A. I think
Mm.
that's something a lot of people don't think about. And when we're talking about this next generation, there's been a lot of loss.
Yeah, and I think we normally associate loss with the death of someone.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be the death of a loved one. It can be a loss. I mean, yeah, my kids were going through that, and what they lost in terms of opportunities and relationships and stuff like that, where they were, is we may never know. I mean, there's I can think of several losses that they will never experience because of that. And there's a different kind of grief involved.
Yes. But it is a grief.
Yes,
And I
it
think
is.
that's the biggest thing that when I um was trying to, like I said, work through this myself, work through this with other people, I would think to myself, they're grieving. They're
Yeah.
literally grieving.
Hmm.
And I think that the understanding that healing takes time and possibly your focus.
Yeah.
And if I were to describe grief, and like we said, I've lost a job, or a goal is suddenly unobtainable, or there's
Hmm.
a tragic accident, or I move to a new community, and I
Yeah.
lose my friends, or even a promotion, I'm going to go to a different workplace and things are going to look different. Could have
Hmm.
a loss with, like I said, something
Yeah.
doesn't turn out like I thought it should, right?
Yeah.
The What we know as losses is we have to go through them, and every one of us would rather, I mean, and I'm putting me in this category, would rather go around, over, or under that
Oh, yeah.
emotional piece because it's just no fun.
It's messy.
It's messy. I'm literally going to grieve. And some of us are more emotive. So, we're like, okay, I can do that. But there's a whole other attachment style out there that doesn't like feeling those emotions.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, that's
when
true.
I say, hey, there's a burning building on fire right there, and I need you to go through the front door. I need you to feel this, you know. They're like, yeah, I don't think so,
Yeah,
you
no,
know?
no, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because yeah, it can be very painful because it kind of circling back around, you mentioned, so many times we deal with these symptoms and we don't deal with the root. And when you're
yes,
really getting to the root of it, it's deep. I mean, you don't just chop a weed off. Sometimes I have to take that little tool and stick it way down into the
right.
dirt to really get the root out of it. And
Yes,
so sometimes that can be very, very, very painful. Well, Diane, I know I mentioned there is so much more that we could go into, so many of the habits and the foundations and so much good stuff in this book. We will encourage people to go out and get that. But I always like to ask